I'm so glad to see all of you here today. Now, you all are here to learn more about Tableau. You know a lot of the knobs and a lot of the levers that Tableau gives you to explore your data. But have you ever wondered how to build your own knobs and your own levers so that you can control your data analysis? That's what today is about. It's about using parameters to get more control over your analysis and then to give that control to your users in your workbooks and dashboards so that they can explore the data the way that you want them to. So first, a little bit about me. My name's Matt. I like to hike. I'm a development manager at Tableau on the calculations team, but when I'm not working, I like to get as far away from technology as I can. I like to get out of the city and out onto the trail. My wife and I love to travel, and when we go out, we try and find some place as remote as possible to go exploring. The other thing that I like to do when I'm not helping my team build awesome data modeling and analytics features is search and rescue in King County, which is a lot like hiking, but it's usually dark and it's frequently raining. So, I hope you all like demos because that's what we'll be spending a lot of time on today. But first, I want to talk a little bit about parameters in the abstract. Parameters are a way for us to capture user input. If you're a programmer, you can think of them as a variable. For the rest of us, you can think of them as a placeholder that you can fill user input into later. Now, there's some interesting facts about how parameters work in Tableau that can help you use them more effectively. The first is that they're just a field. You can use them in any way that you can use a field in the product. So you can use them on a viz, you can put them in a calculation, but there's a bunch of other places in the product where you can plug a parameter in and control some behavior. Now, the other interesting thing about parameters is that they're in their own data source. They don't really come out of a particular set of data. They're created by the user, they're created by you, and used in relation to any data that you have. Now, there's another feature that's very similar, or can be used in similar ways to parameters, and that's sets. But there are some really important differences between them. A parameter stands on its own. It doesn't have to come out of the data. It's a user input value, and it can be whatever you want. Sets, on the other hand, are a slice of the data. They are linked to the data, and as the data changes, the domain of the set updates. So it can be really useful to use a set in cases where you're looking for values that come out of the data itself. A technique that I really like to use is using a parameter to drive the membership of a set using a computed set. And we'll see a lot of that today. All right, now we're going to move on to demos. So I talked about the fact that I really like hiking, and so this is data that gets me really excited. My data set that I'll be starting off with is a list of hikes in Washington State. Now, this is the data that gets me really excited. I hope you guys are going to be thinking about the data that gets you really excited. Think about how to use these techniques for your data. Instead of hikes, maybe these are stores or facilities or schools or airports or any other place where data happens. So I have my first viz here. It's just a list of hikes and how long they are. And I've already created a parameter. It's this top end parameter control over here. And as I click around, the thing that you'll notice is that it does absolutely nothing. That's because parameters only have value that you give to them. If you haven't hooked up a parameter to anything, it just doesn't do anything. So let's give this parameter some value. I'm going to create a filter. It's going to be a top-end filter. And instead of picking a static number, I'm going to use my parameter that I've already created. And now, when I click OK, I have the top n, where n is specified by this parameter. I can select less or more data. Isn't that awesome? All right. It's honestly a little bit lame. What I really want is something like this, something that's super interactive, that has a bunch of parameter controls, that lets me dial into exactly the kind of hike that I'm looking for. And then once I've found something that I'm interested in, I want to be able to see it on a map. So let's look at how to build something like this, and we'll start from the beginning. So back to my list of hikes, they're sorted by length, and I'm going to create a parameter. See, when I'm trying to find a hike, I'm trying to find something that I can get done in a day, but what that means depends on the day that it is. If it's a weekend, maybe I go out hiking for the whole day and I can go 10 miles. If it's an after work hike, maybe I'm only going to be out for an hour or two and I just want a couple mile hike. And so I need a parameter to control what that threshold is. So I'm going to go to the schema viewer and say create a parameter. I'm going to give it a name like max length, and it's a float, so that's a number with a decimal. I'll start off with a reasonable default, and I want to be able to pick any number between 1 and, let's say, 15, with a half-mile step size. All right, now I have my parameter. I'm going to show it on the viz so that I can interact with it. And again, this isn't doing anything yet because I haven't hooked it up to anything, but I can. I'm going to go to this filter, edit it, and in the condition, instead of just comparing against a static value, I'm going to compare against that new parameter. And just like that, I can filter out data based on my criteria, and that criteria can change based on what I've selected in that parameter. The other thing that I want to do with this visualization is give it a title that reflects my new filter. So I'm just going to double-click on the title, and instead of using sheet name, I'm going to call this hikes under, and then I'm going to insert that same parameter. I'm going to say miles. All right, and now my title, the title of my viz also matches that parameter value that I've set. So now, as I update what my criteria is, the title updates and gives my user the ability to see what I've set up. So this is really powerful, something that we'll be talking about a couple of times today, which is using the same parameter to drive multiple different behaviors. That's one of the really strong suits of parameters. You can control all kinds of things all at once from a single place. So filtering is a great way to draw attention to data that you care about. Another really powerful tool is color. And so what I'm going to do is use a very similar parameter in a set to color my data based on whether or not it matches my criteria. I'm going to go to the set that I've already created, and again, instead of comparing against a static value, I'm just going to reference the parameter on my sheet. And with that, the set membership will update on the basis of what I've set that parameter to. I click OK, and now I can change what hikes are colored based on the value of my parameter. Sets are a great way to draw attention to the data that you care about. Reference lines are another tool. So we're going to go to this next page, and we're going to create a reference line that uses our parameter. All I have to do, I went to the analytics pane, I picked up a reference line, and I drop it on table. And instead of using a computed value, I just use the parameter, or the parameter that I have created for this sheet. And just like that, the line appears, and it moves around based on my parameter control. And we can combine tools. So we had a filter, we had a set, we have a reference line. I can use that set and reference line at the same time, and now the reference line lets the user orient themselves to the data, and the set tells them exactly what does or does not meet the criteria. So as I change the parameter value, I see both the reference line and the set update according to what I've selected. So we're going to keep layering these tools onto each other. And one thing that I notice about this that I don't really like is there's just a ton of data that I don't care about. I really, if it's way too long for me to hike in a day, if this hike is way too long, I don't even want to see it on the viz. And so I'm going to layer a filter on top of my set and reference line. But instead of just filtering out everything that doesn't match my criteria, I'm actually going to add a little bit of a buffer. So in my condition here, rather than comparing directly against a constant value or directly against the parameter, I'm going to add a half-mile buffer. This way, I filter out a lot of data. I see only things that are close to matching my criteria, but I get that little bit of context to know what I just missed out on. And what we see from this is now we see everything that matches and then a couple of things outside. So I have a little bit of context, I know what I just missed out on, but I also see what matches what I'm looking for. But there's something I don't like about this either, and that's as I scroll through here, sometimes there's more context, sometimes there's less. And what I really want is to see the same amount of hikes that are outside of my criteria, no matter what my parameter is set to. And I'm going to use a table calculation to get this effect. I already have my table calculation here, and what it does is it numbers every row based on where the start of the set is. So the first item in the set has an index of 0, everything else in the set has a positive index, and everything outside of the set is negative. All I need to do to get what I'm looking for is move that table calculation to a filter and filter everything that is greater than -3. And now I see exactly 3 hikes outside of my criteria, no matter what value I've selected from my parameter. So I get a constant amount of context. I'm never missing out on something, and I'm never overwhelmed with the number of hikes that I don't care about. All right, now we've been looking at this data plotted in one axis, but it's way cooler to plot data in 2 axes. So we're going to turn this into a scatter plot, and we see that everything that we've done so far still holds up. I have a line, I have a set that's giving me color, and as I change the value of my parameter, it moves the line and it changes the highlighting. But I want to filter on both of these axes. See, when I'm looking for a hike, I'm looking for something that's short enough to do in a day, but steep enough to really hurt my legs. So we're going to put a line on here to get that effect as well. And I have 2 parameters now, 2 reference lines, but the set is a little bit lacking. See, it tells me what matches my length criteria, but it doesn't help me find which hikes match my elevation criteria. Now, if I go back to the schema viewer, I have another set, but it doesn't quite do it for me either, because I put that on there and I can see what matches my elevation criteria, but not what matches my length criteria, and I really want both. And the tool to do that is a combined set. I'm going to select both of these. I'm going to say create combined set, and I'm going to call this elevation and length. And for this set, I want to see everything that matches both of my criteria. So I'm going to say select the members that are shared in both sets. Now I have a new set that I can drag out onto the viz. And when I do, and after I update the colors to match the rest of my presentation, there we go. We see exactly what I'm looking for. I see all of the hikes highlighted that match both of the criteria that I care about. But this shouldn't just be about me. Actually, first, I want to show a new cool feature. Sorry, this is actually really exciting. This is a new feature that came out this year, which is parameter actions. So far, I've been adjusting the values of these parameters by using these little controls off on the right. And what I really want to do is be able to interact directly with the scatter plot, maybe select some marks and see those parameters update accordingly. And with parameter actions, that is super easy. I'm going to go into the actions dialog, and I'm going to add an action to change the parameter value for each of my parameters. So my first one is going to be to set the length. So I'm going to call it set max length. And the parameter that I'm targeting with this is my max length parameter. And what I want to set it to is the average length in miles of the heights that I've selected. And I click OK, and I'm going to do the same thing for elevation. And in this case, I'm going to target my elevation gain, and I'm going to use the elevation gain on my viz. And again, I'm going to use the average. And now, as I select marks on the viz, the parameter values update based on that selection, and I can control what it's showing just very, very easily by interacting with the visualization. You'll notice it's not exactly in the middle. That's because of the step size that I've set. It picks the nearest step based on what the average of the values that I've selected is. So this is a really powerful tool to let people interact directly with the data rather than having to go off to the side and update it there. All right, now I want to make this dashboard a little bit more useful to people who aren't just me. Maybe you want to go on a hike that's good to take kids along on, or that's a little bit more moderate, something not quite as crazy. So you want to be able to choose whether you see things that are above or below the criteria instead of just above. And I've created a parameter here called invert gain, and that's going to let us do that. I'm going to update my elevation set. And when I go into the condition here, we see I can use that parameter. If it is true, I can show you everything that's above the line, and if it's false, I'll show you everything below. So let me get that updated here. And it's a very simple calculation. It's just, if that parameter is true, then show everything that's greater than my parameter value. If it's false, everything that's less than my parameter value. And just like that, I can flip between above and below the line. Now, true and false isn't probably the most intuitive UI to control this sort of thing. So maybe I want to give this a name that is a little bit more intelligible to the person who's using my dashboard. So in my parameter, I'm going to alias the values. True and false are very easy to write calculations around. So I don't want to change those values, but I want them to display as something different to the user. And I'm going to use at least and at most so that you can see if you're selecting heights that are at least that elevation or at most that elevation. And now I can see what I'm going to get based on the selection of my parameter here. Now, the other thing that you'll see that I've done is broken the data up into 3 categories instead of just above and below. I have short, medium, and long, with short being less than 5 miles, long being more than 10, and medium being everything in between. And the thing that I want to point out about this is that that short, medium, and long does not exist anywhere in my data. That's something that I invented through the use of this parameter and the definition of the set. If I go into hike and selected length bucket and go to the condition, I see a case statement that just checks on the value of that parameter, short, medium, or long, and then uses a different condition based on what has been selected. So just as I said, if it's short, then anything that's less than or equal to 5 miles, that's what's in my set. If it's medium, 5 to 10, and if it's long, greater than 10. You'll notice I also aliased those values to give a little bit more information to the user. And now, when I select different values from the parameter, I see that reflected in the viz. Now, there's one more thing that I want to layer onto this example, but before I do that, I'm going to make a little bit of a detour. So far, we've been using sets to either highlight a mark or not. Another really powerful thing that you can do with them is to highlight a portion of a mark using a technique called proportional brushing. Brushing is just coloring for nerds. So in this case, I have attributes of each hike. Maybe a hike is good for wildlife viewing, or maybe it takes you to the top of a mountain, or maybe it's good for kids, or wanders along a river. And these attributes are captured in these guidebook entries that I'm basing this data off of. And what I have here is a viz that groups hikes together based on what region of Washington they exist in. And I'm coloring the proportion of that bar based on what does and does not meet my criteria. So when I go into the set, it's going to be another case statement. And in this case, it's going to be comparing against that parameter value and then checking a different field based on what I have selected in the parameter. So again, if summits is selected, then if that hike has a summit on it, then it will be highlighted, otherwise not. And we can see our data come to life by, if I select good for kids, I can find, well, maybe I want to go someplace in the lowlands around Puget Sound or in the San Juan Islands. If I want to get to the top of a mountain, maybe the North Cascades are the place for me. Now we can take that very same set and layer it on top of our scatter plot. Here I have just the scatter plot and this new set, and we see those marks colored based on what attributes they have. And we can see that coloring change depending on what I have selected. And I can layer that back onto what we've already done. I put that attribute onto a shape encoding to fill in or not, depending on whether that hike meets that criteria. And then I use a combined set to only color the ones that match all of my criteria orange. So now maybe I can find a steep hike that is long and takes me to a peak and is at least as long as I want, and there we go. All right, now the last thing from that original example that I want to show is how to switch to the map and see that same data, but we're going to take one more quick detour before we get there, and that's to use parameters to choose between different dimension values. And in this case, we're going to use that to drill into data on a map. Some visualization types you can drill in and drill out right on the visualization itself, but maps, sometimes that can be tricky to do. And what I want to be able to do is drill in from a major region to a minor region to a specific hike on this map. And to do that, I'm going to use a calculated dimension. It's our old friend, the case statement. And instead of just returning a single dimension, it will return a different dimension based on what my parameter is showing. And now with that, I can drill into minor region. I see more marks appear on the viz. I can drill into hike, and I can see all of the hikes appear on the viz. So this is a really powerful tool. This isn't the only way that you can use parameters to swap out dimensions. One that I was really excited to see a little while ago, somebody was using this same technique to show translated values for dimensions. So they had all of their different languages in their data set, and using that technique, they can swap out which language they're displaying based on the selection in a dropdown. Really, really powerful stuff. So now I want to show back where we were when we started. So we have those same parameter controls, and we have a map now. And this is where I want to talk about another really important point about parameters that I've actually been subverting a little bit for this talk. You may have noticed that I have a ton of parameters. I have a different parameter for every single sheet. That's to keep me sane as I give this presentation, but it's not actually what you want to do in the real world. You want to share your parameters from worksheet to worksheet so that as somebody is interacting with them, they keep that context as they move from one sheet to another. You can have all of the sheets on a single dashboard responding to the same parameter value. They're shared. So we can see here the marks on the map are updating as I select different values for these attributes, different values for above and below. And to see it all combined together, this is that dashboard that I showed you at the beginning. So I've added some text to kind of give flavor to what these parameter values are doing, and I can say, I want to hike with at most 2,000 feet of elevation gain, and it's short, and maybe it's good for kids. And I can see those hikes show up on the map. I can also switch to my scatter plot and see how those hikes stack up on the scatter plot. And I want to talk about how I did that really quick. See, when I switch to map and I go to that sheet, it's actually a really simple technique. I have a filter here, and the condition of that filter is just the value of this parameter. The parameter is either true or false. It says map or chart, but that's just an alias on true and false. map is aliased to true, and so when map is selected, the formula is just true. Nothing gets filtered out. If I switch it to chart, which is the alias of false, this condition will always evaluate to false, and that filters out every mark in the viz. And an important thing to know about Tableau, when you filter out every mark in the viz just goes away. So when I go back to my dashboard here, we'll see what's actually going on, which is the map is floated over the top of the scatter plot, and when I have the map selected, it covers up the scatter plot. And when I switch back to the scatter plot, the map goes away, the chart shines through. All right, one other thing that I want to touch on. I want to go back to our friend, the parameter actions. Again, super cool, new this year. And one thing that you can do with parameter actions is actually create visualizations whose sole purpose is to set a parameter value. So I have 4 such visualizations here. One of them can set my attribute. I have an icon to correspond with each of those attributes, and as I click it, we see the viz update. I can pick above or below the line with these arrows, and I can choose short, medium, and long with this viz at the bottom. And on the left side, I can pick my elevation based on these boxes. Now, this is probably a technique that you want to use a little bit sparingly because you don't want to detract from the data, you don't want to distract people. But let's be honest, I'm a developer and not a designer, so I can't help myself. This is just too cool. So this set of data has taken us about as far as we can go. I'm going to switch to another workbook here with a new set of data. Don't worry, it's still about hiking. In this set of data, we're going to be looking at trip reports. So the last set was guidebook entries. This is somebody goes out on a hike, they take notes along the way for what they saw, where they went, and when they get back to their computer, they type all of those notes up, they submit them, and we get a row of data. Now, again, you don't have to only assume this can be used for trip reports. These techniques can be used for any sort of event-like data. So if you have events that are corresponding to a place, these same techniques will work just as well, and for other types of data as well. So on this visualization, we have weeks of the year, starting in January on the left and moving up to December on the right. And it is grouped in bins of what is the maximum elevation that somebody got to along the way on their hike, starting with very low elevation hikes and very high elevation hikes. And I have a parameter here that can control the size of that bin. As I decrease the size of the bin, it increases the number of bins. And that lets me or the consumer of my viz drill into that data and see some really interesting patterns emerge. We actually see this cool effect where people start hiking early in the year at low elevations, and then in the spring they start moving higher and higher into the mountains, and then start coming back down as fall and winter return. One of the things that we're going to be looking at for the next couple of examples is attributes that people record as they write these trip reports. So we have just the number of trip reports, but we also have how many of them reported seeing flowers along the way, or how many people encountered snow or bugs or fall colors. The first thing that I want to do, as I'm looking at this, I see that the number of records is kind of distorting my whole view of the data. There's just more people who go hiking in the summer, and so it's natural that we would see more people encountering everything in the summer. So I want to control for that by letting the user choose what aggregation they view based on the value of a parameter. I've already created the parameter here. It's going to let me choose between sum and percent. And my formula here is just another case statement. Based on that aggregation parameter, when sum is selected, I return the sum of trip reports that reported a particular attribute, and when percent is selected, it's going to return a calculation that I've already defined that chooses the percentage, that shows the percentage for this viz. And now, I can really quickly change, that's interesting. That's not what I was hoping for. Did I mess up my calculation? I did. Ooh. All right, I'm gonna click OK this time. Now, when I switch this, it shows me the percentage of the trip reports for a given week that reported something, and I see an entire different look on my data. Instead of a whole bunch of people seeing wildflowers, I see that in the peak of wildflower season, just over half of the people who go out hiking experience those beautiful flowers. But in the fall, when the fall colors are out, almost 80% of hikers report seeing those fall colors. Now, another thing that you can do with a very similar technique is change which measure you're looking at on the basis of a parameter value. This can be really useful if you're building a dashboard and you want the user to be able to control which measure they're looking at. What I'm going to do for this calculation, it's just another case statement. The case and parameters go hand in hand. And in this case, it's just going to change which measure is selected based on what the value of my parameter is set to. Instead of just always returning how many bugs there are, it's going to return different measures for each value of the parameter. And so we see the viz update. And this is interesting, but it really becomes powerful when we start combining it with other tools, other techniques. And one of those that I'm going to show you is highlighting a particular measure based on what is selected. Now, we could do that using the highlighter. I could say show highlighter, and as I scrub over here, different values are selected. But we want to be able to drive a bunch of different behavior off of the same parameter value, and so I want to use a parameter to do this. And all I'm going to do is drag that selected attribute out as a dual axes, synchronize the axes, and I'm going to update the color to a nice jaunty orange, maybe make it a little bit bigger. And now, as I change what is my selected attribute, I see different lines highlighted in that red. So what are some other behaviors that we can drive off of this parameter? Well, one that I really like is using a background image. So I can actually give a little bit of context on what we're seeing with this parameter based on what's selected here. Maybe drive a little bit of engagement with the person using my dashboard by making something that really pops and stands out to them. So there's all kinds of things that you can layer on here and build up with a couple of parameter values. So the next thing that I want to show with this data, there's actually two really interesting things going on here. One is a part against whole analysis. I want to compare how different attributes differed from year to year to year. So I want to see how 2018 compared to all of the hikes in my data set. And what I'm going to do to get there is a really useful type of calculation that just says, if this condition is true, so if my year matches my year parameter, then report how many of my reports had that attribute. Otherwise, don't return anything. And we can use that as a building block to build up for all of the different attributes that we're looking at and make this really selectable and configurable. And from that, I can scroll through, I can change attributes, see how 2018 compares to the rest of the data. I can also look at different years. And what I find is in 2015, the snow melted out in Washington way earlier than almost any other year that I have data on. And what I want to do is see how early did it melt out. What I'm going to do, I have a table calculation on the average for the entire data set. And this table calculation is using my other parameter to shift the data back and forth. Right now, it's only set to 0, so it's showing exactly as it normally is. It's just using a lookup to move the data around. And I can use that to say, oh, in 2015, the snow melted out almost 10 weeks earlier than in a normal year. And then I can compare that to other attributes. and see, well, okay, the berry season didn't start until later, but it was still almost 5 weeks early that year. So by using these techniques, you can give your user the ability to tweak the analysis and kind of visually inspect what's going on in the data by shifting it around. And by using that part against whole analysis, you can compare how does the average compare to a specific instance. With that, maybe I use that to help me figure out when I want to go berry picking this year. And from there, I probably want to look at weather data. So this is weather data for Artist Point. It's one of my favorite berry picking areas in Washington. And I'm using a parameter to be able to drill into that date information. This is kind of similar to what we were doing by swapping out measures or swapping out dimensions, but here we're changing the granularity by using a parameter directly in a date trunk calculation. So when I select quarter, it gives me quarters. When I select month, it gives me months. And when I look into this calculation, it's very simple. It's just plugging that parameter directly into the date trunk function. And I can use it just like any other string, and since a string fits in here, my parameter does too. I also am using this to change the width of the bars. I have the size encoding set dynamically based on my parameter value, so I can fine-tune exactly how wide the bars are for every selection of my parameter. Another thing that people frequently like to do with dates is moving averages. This is a really powerful tool for a lot of different industries. It lets you smooth out the data over time. And the wider the window of your moving average, the more smooth the data is. If you shrink the window, you see more of the jaggedness in the data. And you can control how smooth or how jagged your data is using a parameter. As I shrink the window of my moving average, I see more jagged data. If I increase the window of my moving average, I see the data smooth out. All right, now I want to talk about a couple of other places that you can integrate parameters into Tableau. And one of those is with Python integration or other external services. Python is a tool frequently used for data science applications, and maybe you have somebody who's built a model that you want to integrate with Tableau, and we let you do that using TabPy and using table calculations that pass in a script. You can also pass in a parameter value. In this case, I'm just using Python to look through all of the text of my trip reports and find what have certain terms. In this case, I'm looking at goats. Maybe I want to see where I might find a bear. And I type that in, and I see apparently Jester Mountain has a 100% bear sighting rate. So maybe not the place to go berry picking this year. One last place that you can use parameters is with custom SQL. In this case, I have a bunch of highway data. Maybe I'm trying to find how to get to my hike. And there's a lot of data here, and I'm actually going to filter it down using a parameter. To do that, I'm going to go to my data source and edit my custom SQL and just add a where clause that references the parameter on my viz. When I go back to my viz, and this might take a sec, the convention Wi-Fi has been, oh wow, that's pretty cool. But now my data is filtered on the basis of my parameter value. As I change values, the custom SQL reruns with that new clause. Now, filtering probably isn't the best use case for using parameters and custom SQL. If you want to filter your data, Tableau is pretty good at that. It's probably better to let Tableau build the correct where clause for you. But maybe you have different data set up in different stored procedures or different views, and you want to be able to choose between them using a parameter. And that can be a really powerful tool. Sometimes custom SQL is just the only tool that will get the job done, and so it's really, really useful to be able to pull a parameter into that and get some more control. One thing that I do want to point out about custom SQL and parameters in general, you can use parameters to drive filtering out data or something like that, but do be careful about using parameters for security purposes, because one of the valuable points about parameters is they can be set by anybody, including a viewer. So if you are using them for a security purpose, make sure that your security model accounts for the fact that somebody could change that parameter value on the worksheet. And we're going to look at some ways that that works. Here I have a blog post that I've embedded a workbook into. This is things you might encounter while hiking. And I've used JavaScript APIs to set parameter values on the basis of where I've scrolled to in this blog post. So there's a little bit of JavaScript in the background that says, as I scroll past different markers in the text, it will run this code that will set the parameter in my visualization. And as I scroll through, we can see, oh no, oh there we go. We can see the viz update as I scroll past different sections. So this is a really cool way to really tightly integrate a visualization into a blog post, into a website, into a web portal. One last technique that I want to show is how to set a parameter using a URL. See, I've already set up a URL action in my visualization here, and when I click on that line, it's going to take me back into Tableau Server, and it's going to take me to that view with my parameter value set. So here I click, and what we see in the URL is the name of my parameter equals, and then the value that I want to set it to, and we get exactly what we were looking for. So it lets us deep link into a visualization so that somebody coming from somewhere else can get directly to the state that you want them to see in the visualization. And just to show that this isn't all smoke and mirrors, if I scroll to a different section and click on it, it'll give me a different value. So with that, we're back in Tableau, back where we started. We've learned a whole bunch of different ways that we can use parameters in the product. We've seen some really cool ways to consume the parameter and to set the parameter. I hope that everybody learned something from this today. I'll be around for questions after the presentation. You can also find me at Tableau Doctor tomorrow and Friday, and I'll be at Data Night Out. If you have questions, I'll hang around for a little bit here, and if I don't see you at the conference, go on a hike and you'll probably see me out there. Thank you very much.